Right, we've got a few clips to go over from today. I'll keep it short and sweet as usual, but important updates nonetheless.
It is very clear. I tried to make it plain in that piece that I just wrote about the subject. The Lebanon for Israel has become a test case of what we call the equations of this war, if you like, the balance of power in this war. Really, since the 7th of October, Israel has adopted this new doctrine. I've talked about it before, this doctrine of permanent security, going to the root, i.e. not allowing a threat to exist even in latency, potentiality at all, because of the idea that has seized many Israelis and certainly the defense force that what happened in Gaza on the 7th of October was a genocide. It was not, but is regarded that this was a sign that Israel always remained on the threshold of genocide. Genocide was not something in the past. Genocide could happen at any point again, and therefore all enemies had to be eliminated. They could threaten it right down to the point where the children could not emerge and become Hezbollah or Hamas also. So this was a new doctrine, very different from Ben-Gurion's doctrine when Lebanon was founded, which was that Israel had to stay within its borders, small country, small population, small resources. It couldn't fight wars across a region. Well, now they're fighting to eliminate these potential enemies across the whole Middle East. And of course, in this way of thinking, it's impossible for them to envisage that Hezbollah can continue to exist and can continue to be on the borders with their northern townships. These townships are now half empty. Those people have left for fear of being attacked by Hezbollah. And Israel is in Lebanon killing Lebanese. Many thousands have been killed during this period where they've tried to seize and establish an occupation. So there's a point to this, Judge, which is, this is not just a sort of competition about who's boss, Trump or Netanyahu, because when Netanyahu sort of backed off attacking Beirut, he was assuaged with messages coming in from all over Israel, from the hard right to the opposition groups, saying, you cannot do this. You cannot allow Iran to set an equation to insist that Lebanon is part of the equation of the relationship between United States and Iran. You can't let them have command over Lebanon when they can say whether Israel can go in and attack this town or attack people that it targets in Beirut. You can't do that. So it wasn't just about Netanyahu and Trump and who's big boss and who has the bigger say. It was an overwhelming result from Israelis saying, we can't accept this. We have to have the right to go into Lebanon anywhere and to kill those that we deem to be a threat to Israel or a threat to our townships. So it makes it a very explosive element, and an element that's not going to just go away. I mean, this is going to stay because Hezbollah is going to stay, and the IDF are staying in Lebanon. And of course, there's going to be more flare-ups. And the question is, what happens then? Is Iran will react to any Israeli attempts to impose a military equivalence on Lebanon, and Israel will feel forced to retaliate in order to preserve, if you like, the balance of power, as they see it, the balance of power between Iran and Israel, because they've already lost the balance of power overall in the war on Iran, and they don't want to lose the balance of power between Israel and Lebanon.
And I think it's too late. It's like when they wanted to bring Lebanon into the ceasefire, and Netanyahu had the cheek to turn around and say, well, Hezbollah, they have to withdraw from the south of the Litani River. How about the IDF withdraw from Lebanon? But we'll get in the next one. Right, so we've got Matt Ho speaking with Daniel Davis. Go and subscribe to Daniel Davis's channel. He has all the best guests on with the current updates.
Let's. I want to peer into each of these subtexts here, because I think that both are vital to understand here about what's going on. But let me kind of briefly bring everybody up to date on what has been happening here just in the last few days. First of all, you had Iran has been signaling to everybody, the United States and Israel, that if Israel continues its attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon, that's equivalent with breaking the ceasefire and fighting against Iran itself. They're considering themselves one and the same. And Israel ignored that. They continued to fight. They continued to strike even in the outskirts of Beirut. And that apparently a couple of days ago was one too many. And so Iran fired retaliatory strikes into Israel. It was the first time that they had done that without having been attacked by Iran first, with Israel first. And Israel then responded today, and they struck back or in the early morning hours of today. And then Yemen seems to have jumped in there as well, and we'll see what they end up doing with the Bab el-Mandab. But all these things have been going on. Meanwhile, that spurred a lot of action with President Trump, who had been, first of all, asking Iran to stop, don't do any more, just let that be enough, and let's get back to making a deal. And then he told Netanyahu, okay, but by the way, you don't need to respond. And then he did. And then later this morning, we see that according to the Israeli media here, the Jerusalem Post, that Netanyahu and Trump spoke on the phone before he posted on True Social that both sides, Iran and Israel, are looking to do an immediate ceasefire, which, of course, he was trying to put pressure on them to do. Final negotiations on peace are proceeding, subject to ignorance or stupidity getting in the way. The blockade will remain in place and in full force in effect until a final deal is reached. Things should move quickly. Thank you to your attention to this matter. So all of that is a context here. And right now, Israel has come out subsequent to all of this. Benjamin Netanyahu specifically said, by the way, don't let anybody be confused here. If Iran attacks us or if we get attacked by Hezbollah, we are going to respond. Meanwhile, the Iranian side also said the same thing. So, I'm sorry, it's this one right here. The IRGC described their operation as a response to Israel's actions in Lebanon and threatened to resume the attacks if aggressions and hostile acts continue. So we have a tenuous ceasefire within a ceasefire, I guess you could say. It's holding, but both sides, Iran and Israel, are saying that if the other does anything, we're ready to pull the trigger again. How do you see this thing folding out here? Are we on the cusp of peace like Trump said?
No, I think we're very far away from peace, and I think we will be until there's some type of really transformational geopolitical shift in the region, whether it's events that install a new empire in control of the region. So the American imperial collapse is quicker than expected, and another hegemon takes that position. The assumption would be China. But even then, you're looking at, even on an accelerated timeline with black swan events and things occurring that no one had predicted, you're looking at years from something like that happening. You could have a collapse within Israel itself, a descent into civil war, something that the Israelis warn about, they talk about quite often. Maybe that would happen sooner. But, until you have essentially this removal of the quest for domination by both the Israelis and the Americans on all parts of the Middle East. I think last time we talked about Israel's new obsession with Turkey. All right, so until you remove that, how do you take away the motivation, the fuel for these organizations, whether they're Palestinian resistance organizations, Iraqi resistance organizations, Hezbollah, or the Iranian state. I mean, fundamentally, they see their motivation, they see their impetus as coming from resistance to domination by foreign powers. And they clearly see Israel as not just a foreign power in the sense of they exist outside of our boundaries, but foreign as in they are a colonial project, that they came from Europe, that these people are invaders. And so until you take away that calculation, I don't know how you resolve this. The best you get is some type of status quo that's heavily managed. But and I think that's what we're essentially seeing here is the Iranians trying to create some type of degree of deterrence, trying to create some degree of certainty that there will be no tolerance for future actions against Israel's neighbors, as we've seen in the past. And certainly, the important thing from that quote from the Iranians just today or yesterday, whenever that was that they see they include southern Lebanon as being under their protection. And that it's just not Israeli bombings of Beirut that going forward will engender an Iranian response, but also Lebanese or the southern Lebanon. It's important to note that they're not saying the same about Palestine. A week or so ago, the Iranians did put out a statement where they did talk about the use of their ballistic missiles and drones to support the Palestinian resistance. But that seems to have been pretty much a one-off statement, more rhetorical than actually, policy. But you see the Iranians understand the limits of their power, right? Where they're pushing this forward towards Lebanon, but they're not including the Palestinians. But that's the calculus the Iranians have, is that we have to be realistic in what we're trying to accomplish here. I don't see, the other option for there being peace is, of course, for Donald Trump to make a separate peace with Iran, and then remove American support from Israel. And, that is a very hard thing to envision. Even though I get the feeling that in the message that you just read off from Donald Trump, when he speaks about stupidity getting in the way, I get the feeling that he's talking about Benjamin Netanyahu. The idea that the United States Donald Trump would say, okay, no more support for Israel. The Israelis are on their own here. No more bombs, no more fuel, no more munitions, no more money, no more intelligence support, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't see, that occurring. The idea that even a separate peace between the Americans and the Iranians seems highly, highly unlikely.
Yeah. And I want to get into some of the details of what you wrote about, especially on why the resistance won't end, because I think that's kind of the fulcrum on everything else pivots. But let me show you a couple of things here that even on the surface level, just make it nearly impossible in the current circumstances to get to a deal. First of all, let me show you what the Iranian military advisor to the supreme leader said regarding the building of trust.
This is a sign of trust building. If Trump takes the negotiations seriously, $24 billion is not much to America. If he wants to reach an agreement with Iran, this $24 billion is a test of trust that Iran wants to have with Trump. This is a test that America must pass, and the path will be opened. This is our own money, not America's money.
Yeah, President Trump has kind of bent over backwards, as you're going to see here in a second, all these years to talk about how bad the JCPOA is, about Obama's deal, which was a path to a bomb. He called it all the time. And one of the big things he talks about a lot is these plane loads of cash that were given over to them. And so here we have the Iranian side saying, okay, because we hadn't had any trust in the United States, and there's all the things you've done already to violate our trust in the 2018, the 2025 war, the 2026 start of this war and negotiations and all that. Then you went to fight us anyway. So now then we're still willing to talk to you, but there's going to have to be some trust built up front. And this time we're going to have to get something first, and then we'll give something separately. So how do you see that translation or maybe even conversion, that Iran seemed to be willing, as recently as February, this past February, they seemed to be willing to negotiate on a I guess a balanced basis, even from the front, without demanding anything up front, to where we are now.
I think the Iranians understood where this war would go. The Iranians warned about this war. The Iranians said if we enter into a war for the third time, I mean, remember there were Israeli and Iran exchanged fire in 2024. Then, of course, you had twice in 2024. Then, of course, you had the 12-day war in June of 2025. And all along, Iran was saying that these were short engagements or temporary engagements, and that they saw the sensation of hostilities, and that was it. But warning that if it happens again, this will be a war where war is how this is resolved. And so I think the Iranians understood what they were going to do, that they were going to close the Straits of Hormuz, obviously, but also, too, that they were going to attack U.S. allied states throughout the region, including their energy infrastructure. And they knew that this war would be ruinous, for the region, for the globe. And so I think the Iranians tried to warn off the United States and Israel, try and give them a path out, said, look, we don't want a nuclear weapon. We've been saying it. So here's the deal. We're willing to downblend this enriched uranium, go down to 3.67. I think back in February, they even offered a moratorium for a while, if I remember correctly. But, certainly the deal that the Iranians were offered, as presented to us through Oman and as confirmed by the British National Security Advisor in The Guardian, was a deal better than anything the Americans could have expected getting through any other means. And of course, the Americans with the Israelis were just bent upon going to war. They believed they could achieve regime change, or they believed they could create a civil war in Iran, or heavily destabilize it, or at least bomb it bomb it into a position where it couldn't be a threat to anyone. And of course, they're wrong on all those. So I think what the Iranians were offering at the end of February matches up with how they have acted over the last several years in terms of offering a pathway through diplomacy, willing to make concessions when they don't need to make concessions, but now and warning the entire time that if we go back to war, that this will be a war that has a resolution to it, that this will not be something that just we end and then the status quo continues. So I think, when you hear Danny, how often have we heard from, politicians, pundits, just as an adage that war is the last resort, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the United States doesn't really ever seem to mean that. But the Iranians, I think
war is a policy option of first choice these days. We just got to be honest.
Exactly. And I think for the Iranians, they chose war really was last resort. That they put up with all these things for years. They put up with the cyber attacks, the assassinations, the sabotage, this really draconian sanctions on them, this economic warfare. They put up with the U.S. Treasury crashing the rial, the Iranian currency last year. They put up with the Europeans snapping back the JCPOA sanctions right at the end of last year. They put up with all of that. And then they are willing to negotiate, willing to essentially give the Americans what they want. But the Americans, along with the Israelis, they want a victory. And so for the Americans, there was no actual goal that was to be achieved. It was all just they were looking for the best possible press release they could get, the best possible soundbite, the best addition to the narrative that Donald Trump is better than Barack Obama. That's what the Americans were chasing here. They weren't chasing any policy. They weren't chasing any goals. There were no real objectives. There was no one looking at the map and saying, okay, if we do this, if we do A, and that curtails Iran here, then B, C, D, and E will happen. No, this is all about Donald Trump eventually being able to send out a Truth Social message that says, I'm better than Barack Obama.
And that's it. I don't blame Iran one bit, because Trump and Netanyahu thought they could just bully them into submission, but they underestimate the Shia steadfastness, But we'll get into the next one now. Right, a bit of information here and context from Larry and Nima.
In fact, he's almost like conciliatory. So he's keen on getting a deal. So this was Bibi Netanyahu, and then the Iranians themselves had declared that any further attacks on Beirut, they would retaliate, and they warned the people in northern Israel, get the hell out. You'll be we're coming after you. So this was a deliberate effort by Bibi Netanyahu. I think he ordered the strike in order to, knowing that Iran would respond, that Israel would get hit, and then Israel would use that as a justification to bring the United States into it, and that would kill the deal. Didn't happen. Trump basically said, no, you stay out. Tried to talk him out of doing any kind of retaliation. And then I guess the last thing he said was, if you do it, you're doing it without us. You're on your own. So here's, the Israelis, I think, actually had never thought that Trump would leave them hanging. And Trump left them hanging. And so they've responded with, Iran fired that first volley, 5 waves, 4 missiles per wave, so a total of 20 missiles, hitting a variety of targets in Israel. But it wasn't, it was more designed to say, hey, we told you not to do it, so here, we're smacking you upside the head a little bit, but we're not really punishing you. And at that point, Israel, instead of listening to Trump and holding their fire, they decided to retaliate, and they lose, I think, sent about 11 missiles. They hit at least five different sites, several of them sites that they believe that the missiles have been launched from. And so what does Iran do like an hour later or half hour later? They fire more missiles at Israel from those very sites that Israel had hit with its missiles. And basically said, hey, fuck you. You didn't lay a glove on us. That kind of thing. I believe Israel responded after that. Iran has since responded again. And the really important development that people need to pay attention to is what Larijani, and let me pull this up because it's there it is.
Larijani, the head of the Council of Experts?
Yes, the expedient, they call it the Expediency Discernment Council, Sadek Larijani. I guess, was it his brother it was his brother?
Exactly. His brother was the head of the Security Council, the head of National Security Council.
Okay. So Sadek Larijani said that, and let me quote, Tehran's intervention in support of Lebanon constitutes a formal declaration of a new strategic doctrine under which attacks on any component of the resistant axis will trigger a response that extends beyond geographic boundaries and reshapes regional equations. Now, Larijani said that Iran has entered a new phase in which it no longer waits for threats to emerge before acting to preserve its regional positions. So this is something really new. Iran is taking the initiative. He also warned, apparently, that any expansion of the conflict or attack on critical Iranian infrastructure would be met with a comprehensive and deterrent response. So we're in the new territory now. So basically, continued attacks on the Palestinians and Lebanese, Iran's going to continue to respond. They're going to continue to hit Israel with one missile after another. I think we're in, I'll liken this is sort of like the 12-day war, where by day 10, Israel was pleading with the United States, oh, get us out of this, help. But I think Israel's going to be pleading for help long before that. I think they'll be able to endure about 6-7 days of this, and then they'll be, tapping out, saying, okay, please get us out of this. And I don't think there's any exit this time.
And it's FAFO in it. Like you say, you cannot blame Iran. They're poking the bear. And I'm with Iran on this slide, but we'll get into the next one. It's another Larry clip from today on Mario's podcast. Just jump into this one here.
In order to derail, they knew their intelligence. Remember, over the weekend, it was leaked that the Pentagon was really stepping up counter intelligence activities against Israel, because Israel was intensifying its spying, trying to figure out what the United States was going to do with Iran. And now, when that's leaked to the New York Times like that, you've got to understand that, you know, I called it sort of a dog bites man story. You know, Israel's spying on the United States. Well, yeah, no shit. That's been going on for 70 years. So we're glad you woke up and figured it out. Anybody hear of Jonathan Pollard by chance? Just saying. The fact that the Pentagon leaked this to the, you know, somebody leaked it, and it was either done with the full cooperation of the Trump administration to put more heat on Israel, to, you know, further isolate Israel, or there was just somebody in the intel chain, maybe Tulsi Gabbard, that's going our way out and just said, "Oh, fuck it, I'm going to put this out. I don't care if Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump like it or not." You know, I can't tell you which it is, but the effect is it's more negative news about Israel. It doesn't help build Israel's credibility in the United States. It doesn't make them somebody that everybody says, "Oh yeah, let's back Israel." So anyway, today then, this strike out of nowhere from Iran, it's not to hit the target in Dahia was to be a deliberate provocation. And I think this is backed by some of the extreme, you know, I don't want to suggest that Bibi Netanyahu's not an extremist, but he's not a Ben Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich kind of crazy. You know, he's corruptible and crazy in a different way. Those guys are complete maniacs, madmen. And somebody in the Iranian chain of command that shares their views launched a strike into Beirut, and got, you know, Iran, true to its word, it said, "Hey, if you hit that, just tell everybody in northern Israel, get the hell out. You should evacuate." And they retaliated. And so now where it stands is, and I think the way the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, one of the spokesmen phrased it, was, "Okay, this is a warning. We've warned you. Notice we said we'd strike, we have struck, but we haven't hit you full force. If you come back at us, we're going to come back at you with something you haven't experienced yet." And I don't think they're just talking shit. I don't think they're, you know, like two schoolboys claiming to be bigger and stronger than the other. I think Iran means exactly what it says. And I think Israel is running a great risk of underestimating Iran's response. You know, for example, they're talking about, "Oh, we want to take out the energy infrastructure in Iran." Iran is 80 times larger than Israel. Those morons don't seem to understand that. It's, you know, the best way to put it in perspective, if you got a 3-foot tall midget or dwarf going up against a 6'8", 400-pound sumo wrestler, and they're going to trade punches, who can sustain the punches the longest? The sumo wrestler, not the midget. No matter how tough, how determined they are, the fact is, if Israel wants to try to hit infrastructure in Iran, it's impossible for them to do it in one strike. The country's too damn big. However, Iran can take out the energy infrastructure in Israel because it is so small. God, do these people not know how to do basic math and geometry and that stuff? It really drives me crazy. Sorry.
And that was just another one from Larry there, just putting things into context, like. And then we've just got one more. The Houthis I think they're going to join the party. Last one, Daniel Davis.
The leverage that they have with the Strait of Hormuz is going to give that up. So that's where we are. We are back at square one, back where we were at the beginning on the 40th day of the war with the ceasefire, looking for an end. There isn't one. There's still no prospect for one, because President Trump is basically taking it off the table by precluding the one thing that could actually start a genuine negotiation. So until he changes that, we're going to stay in the status quo. Unfortunately, well, it's not really the status quo, because there has been one other change I haven't told you about yet, and that is what's going on in the Red Sea, because now the Houthis have joined the fray as they're, sorry, this is really, he always shouts really loud here, but you can read the subtitles on the bottom. Here is the spokesman for the Houthis explaining that they are now in the fight.
أولاً نعلن حظر الملاحة البحرية بشكل كامل وتام على العدو الإسرائيلي في البحر الأحمر، ونعتبر أن كل تحركات العدو أصبحت هدفاً عسكرياً لقواتنا المسلحة من لحظة إعلان هذا البيان. ثانياً نؤكد أننا سنواجه التصعيد بالتصعيد، وإن عملياتنا العسكرية ستكون متصاعدة بما يواكب الأحداث والمعركة والاشتراك وبالاشتراك مع محور الجهاد والمقاومة. ثالثاً نؤكد على حق شعبنا وشعوب أمتنا الحرة في مواجهة العدوان الأمريكي الإسرائيلي، وأننا لن نقف مكتوفي الأيدي أمام الحصار الظالم على شعبنا وشعوب محور الجهاد والمقاومة في فلسطين وغزة وإيران ولبنان والعراق، وأن كل محاولات العدو.
So you see that this has not been stopped. So if we have shown you that President Trump's diplomacy on the phone this morning apparently did succeed for the moment to get Israel not to fire back the next round of missiles against Iran that they had planned for today, and whether it's coincidental or whether it was because of Trump, who knows? But apparently, at least as of the moment, the Iranian side said that they're going to stop their missiles. What has not stopped or changed, however, is the Houthis claim that they're now joining the fight. And so this whole axis of resistance is now fully engaged. So you have Hezbollah in Lebanon. You have apparently some of the Kataib Hezbollah and some of the other groups in Iraq. You have the Houthis in Yemen. They're all joining with Iran. So now then they've activated almost their entire axis of resistance. We had been kind of wondering why that didn't happen earlier. Who can say for sure why it didn't happen earlier, but now it appears to be activated all along. I think part of the reason is because Iran realizes that it is in a much stronger position. Everybody else realizes they're in a stronger position. And I think that the other elements of this axis of resistance are saying, hey, I think maybe Iran's going to come out on top of this. This may be the time to join in with them and do something about it. So the question is going to be, what is Houthis going to do? Because if they close down the Bab el-Mandab, which is the other strait in the Red Sea, if they do what they have said here, and they said no Israeli-backed ships are going to go through, and if they say no, if they define that as any kind of like oil that's coming through, because remember, a whole bunch of Saudi oil and some of the other Gulf GCC countries' oil has been going out through a pipeline into the Red Sea, out through the Bab el-Mandab. I believe that somewhere between 3 and 4 million barrels a day comes out of that. If the Houthis shut that down and don't allow anything to go through there, if we have the same situation in the Strait of Hormuz, now it's not around 12 million barrels a day, but now it could be around 15 million barrels a day of oil that don't come out. We'll see what happens with that. It's a statement so far. I haven't seen any physical action so far, but
and there you go. And when the shit hits the fan, as they say, you know who's to blame. The main two aggressors. Well, we'll know who's really in charge out of the two, but that's the updates for today anyway.